What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel.
All right, members of the Rob Corps, so we are finally here. We are covering the Whisperers in The Walking Dead. I gotta tell you, these guys are worse than Negan. I mean, because here's the deal. Negan was a guy that you knew was there. Like, when he showed up, his presence was obvious to the world. You know, he was cussing up and down. He had the most foul mouth I've ever heard. But his charisma as a bad guy was just amazing. Like, I loved him as a bad guy. But with the Whisperers, you don't know they're there until they kill you. So it's a really funny situation, or at least until you're on the verge of dying. Sometimes you might get away, but usually by the time you're aware of their presence, you're dying. Like, and what we'll actually see just how dangerous they are once we get around to the end of the story. But what we do here is we initially pick up with a woman named Magna. Now, this is essentially Robert Kirkman introducing a new element into The Walking Dead. He doesn't get rid of Rick and Maggie. In fact, we still focus on them quite a bit in this story. They're still the biggest emphasis of this, but it's also Kirkman introducing new characters in. Now, if I were to hazard a guess, I would go as far as to say that we may see the cast of, Fear the Walking Dead moving across grounds and eventually blending in with Rick's group or coming into contact with the Alexandria safe zone. I know that it's been said that's never gonna happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did, just because of the fact that it makes the most sense. But the idea here is that Magna and her forces, are really just using like this tanker, I guess, not really a tanker, but like a cargo container, shipment container, and making their way across the countryside. Now, what's really cool about the way that Kirkman does this is almost identical to the way that Rick Grimes and his group used to function. I mean, you got the cargo aspect of an 18-wheeler being pulled by horses, and they're essentially just trying to make their way. Now, the reason why I say this is much like the way things used to be is because in the early days of the Walking Dead comics, this is how it was. This is one of the big differences between the comics and the TV show. In the TV show, we still have motorcycles, we still have cars. Granted, they have to be repaired almost every day just because of the fact that they're literally all on their last legs, but they're still available. In the comics, that doesn't exist. There are no cars, there are no motorcycles. There were at one point in time, but they're all gone now. And so they're literally all just traveling on horseback, they're traveling through carriage somewhere along the line, but they don't have any sort of motorized and mechanized form of transportation. And so again, it's actually kind of cool here, but we also have Magna and her group coming across a horde. Now, hordes in The Walking Dead are a really cool concept because it's literally just an army of zombies moving in one direction. Now, with regards to the comics versus the TV show, hordes were introduced into the TV show long before they were introduced in the comics. So this is to say, I guess, if you're following timelines, and here's what I mean. In the TV show, Rick Grimes and his group came across a horde by just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were on a highway, and just like a mountain of zombies was just moving their direction. They all hid under cars, and it was a really tense moment. It was actually really badass the way that it was done. And of course, it ended up leading to the death of T-Dog, because that guy sucked anyway. I'm sorry, T-Dog fans, but I hated his character. Like, I thought he was gonna be like a poor man's Tyrese. And I was like, no. We need the real Tyrese. We don't need T-Dog. That guy sucks. But within the comics, the horde was never seen. It was only mentioned at first by Abraham. When Rick and his team first came into contact with Abraham, he said, look, when you guys fire off a shot, a zombie somewhere is gonna hear that. And that zombie is gonna start moving towards the direction of the sound that it heard. And then some zombies are gonna follow him. And as they make their way through towns, more zombies will follow them. And the next thing you know, you got a zombie horde that's 10,000 strong, all heading in your direction because you fired off a gunshot. And so it was really cool. Now, eventually we did see a horde in full force. And that's exactly what we're seeing right here. It's literally just thousands and thousands and thousands of zombies. Now, it's not like these zombies could sense Magna and her team. It's not like these zombies all came looking for her. It's simply that they were just in the wrong place. Like, it's just two groups that just happen to run into each other at the wrong time. Now, of course, in the midst of all this, we also have essentially the forces of the Alexandria safe zone. We, of course, have Heath, and we have another guy who are helping them to escape. Now, this is actually kind of the kicker because right now, Heath isn't dead in the comics. It seems like he's dead in the TV show if you watch the most recent episode that came out last week. But it seems like he's alive right now, but we also have Eugene. Now, this again is really great circumstance because what it shows us is that in the time that's passed, ever since the conclusion of, the war, I guess the Savior Alexandria War, the war between Negan and Rick, things have become a lot more organized and a lot more structured with the Kingdom and the Alexandria safe zone and the Hilltop Colony all working in unison to create a better, locale for themselves. Now, of course, we're also going to learn, like, they don't run shit. They have no clue what's going on with the bigger picture. But we also have Magna and her team who were rescued, but also essentially, bailing out to a degree. Now, they're also led to the Alexandria safe zone by one of Alexandria's guys. They're essentially brought to its location, but when they get there, things are a little shady. But switching back to the Alexandria safe zone itself, things are, it's really Kirkman saying, hey guys, here's where things stand at the moment. Like, we have the Alexandria safe zone coming together, the people are planting crops, it's really a great, huge locale environment, and things have progressed quite a bit to the sense that it's very much self-sustaining. Now, this is what Rick was shooting for. During the Rick and Negan war, this is what he was fighting for, was to create a self-sustaining colony outside of the need of the Hilltop colony and the kingdom itself. And the reason why this is important is because if they operate independently, if they're not in need of the other's resources, then that means that each individual colony's resources can be devoted to the colony itself, which means that they can in turn only really need each other for wartime resources, and those wartime resources will be more readily available than they would normally be under a circumstance if they all needed each other. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but it's like having countries that can operate in and of themselves as opposed to countries that need each other. In the end, everybody thrives. A rising tide lifts all ships, so to speak. And so again, we basically have schools that are being set up here. We have, houses that are being built, houses that are being repaired. Everybody in the Alexandria safe zone has a task. They have a job to do. Now, we're also going to learn that things are a little rough between Rosita and Eugene, because remember, they're together now. They're officially a couple. The problem is that there's some shaky waters, some rough waters between them. But ultimately, we pick up with the arrival of Magna and her team showing up to Alexandria. And of course, they're all reveal their names. We have Luke and we have, Kelly and so on and so forth. But what's interesting about this, and this is why I love Kirkman's writing with this, is that Magna and them are exactly the way Rick Grimes and his team used to be, in the sense that they arrive into this colony in the exact same way that Rick and his team arrived at Alexandria safe zone, and their initial thought is, there's something wrong here. Something's not right here. There's no way that this can be as good as it seems. If something's too good to be true, then it probably is. There's got to be a darker side here. There's got to be a far more unsavory side here to everything that's going on. And so again, one of the other big issues, this is one of the things that I really enjoy about Kirkman with regards to Negan, is he didn't just write him out of existence. He didn't just say, well, Negan's a prisoner now, he's being held by Rick, but we're never going to see or hear from him again. Instead, we continue to see Negan. And in fact, not only do we continue to see Negan has been talking to Rick Grimes quite a bit. They've been having these almost daily sessions where they just talk about things. Now, this is awesome because what this shows us is that Negan has a very human side. We know that from the origin story that we covered last week. Negan has a very human side. More so than that, Carl is really like, Negan's connection with the remnants of humanity. Because remember, he's just basically being held in a prison. I mean, he does not see the outside world. The only time he ever sees people is when somebody comes in to clean out the shit from his bucket, whenever Rick Grimes comes in to give him food, or whenever Carl comes in to talk to him. But Carl coming in and speaking to him directly gives him a very human element. It gives him a very human connection. Now, Carl's concern is about his father, not in the sense that his father's failing or the fact that his father's a terrible leader or anything like that. Not at all. It's the overprotective nature of Rick Grimes with regards to Carl. And this is cool because this is Carl effectively growing up. Now, we haven't covered, the early days of Carl in the Walking Dead comics. We didn't cover, how he had to grow up after Rick's hand was cut off. But during that point in time, when the governor cut off Rick's hands after the fall of Woodbury, when all the, survivors of Rick's team were kind of scattered like sticks to the wind, we basically had Carl and Rick sticking together. And Rick almost died under those circumstances. He got sick and he almost passed on. Carl was the one that basically had to survive on his own. He had to make sure his father was safe. He had to scavenge for resources. He had to grow up extremely fast at a very fast pace. And because of this, he looks at his father as a great leader, but he also says, look, I'm grown up now. I'm not a child anymore. I can't be treated like a child. It can't be assumed that I'm a child. I'm effectively a man because everything I've done up to this point makes me a man. And so confiding this kind of thing in Negan also reminds us that Carl still wants to kill him. That Carl still hates him. Carl hates what it is that Negan did. Carl hates the fact that Negan killed some of his friends, but Carl needs Negan just as much as Negan needs him, or at least he needs the outlet that comes with Negan. Now, from here, we have Rick Grimes and Eugene conversing with one another. And this is a really small thing, but what it, again, just focuses a lot on the character in the sense that Eugene's trying to struggle with the idea that he and Rosita seem to be going their own separate ways. They seem to essentially be splitting up. He doesn't quite know why, but it seems like they're going their own separate ways and they're just naturally gravitating apart. Now, not everything that we see is what it seems to be, but this is Kirkman, planting the seeds of saying, hey, there's a much bigger picture going on here when it comes to Eugene and Rosita herself. But the big thing here is really Andrea in terms of how she deals with Magna. Because of the fact that Magna doesn't trust anybody in the Alexandria safe zone in the same way that Rick never trusted anybody when he first got there, Andrea basically puts the screws to her. Now, Magna tries to control the terms of this interview that's going on, and Andrea immediately says, no, I'm running this show. If you don't like it, you can get the hell out. Like, we'll literally just send you out of here back to where you came from. But the possibility of living in a self-sustaining colony with people who are literally just doing the best they can and harbor no ill will is too good of an opportunity to pass up. And so what Magna does is she basically reveals her story. She says that they're from Richmond, Virginia. They were in Washington, D.C. at one point. Well, the problem is that Washington, D.C. turned into a bloodbath. Now, we know that that was the case because we've heard that mentioned before. You know, we know that the major places, the major cities, you know, Atlanta, you know, specifically in the early days of the comics, we know that that was a huge rallying point, that when society began to come crumbling down and the government was setting up safe zones, they were setting them up in highly populated areas because the resources were so high. Not only that, I mean, you had, you know, high-rise buildings and you had these huge, you know, apartments, and you had a lot of places where people could stay and they could be protected. The problem is that what works for you will work against you. And so with these highly populated cities, all it would take is for, you know, half a dozen people to be infected and those highly populated cities come crashing down. And that's exactly what happened in Atlanta. You know, a handful of people were infected, they got in there, the zombie virus spread, and everybody died. With regards to Washington, D.C., it was the exact same way. Now, this is where Kirkman deviates from the comics a little bit with the TV show. And I've been meaning to find a place to talk about this, and I kind of figured this is just as good as any. But in the TV show, we saw the CDC. You know, the CDC came out and it was like, hey, you know, we know about this, we've been trying to find a cure, but there's no cure for it. You know, people don't turn at the same time. But it did introduce the idea in the TV show that when you die, you turn into a zombie. Now, it wasn't initially known in that episode. It wasn't until after they left the CDC that they found out. But in the comics, the CDC never existed. That was never an element of the comic books. Kirkman added it into the TV show because, again, he wanted the show to basically make up for the mistakes that he believed he made in the comic books. But they basically just found that out later on. Like, they ended up discovering that, I believe it was when Tyrese's daughter had killed herself in a love pact with her boyfriend, when her boyfriend basically ducked out and didn't do it. But Tyrese's daughter reanimated after killing herself, and that's when they realized that people who die, regardless of whether it's natural causes or not, will reanimate. This is also the reason why Rick actually went back and stabbed Shane in the head when he came to the realization that Carl shooting him in the neck would allow him to reanimate. But the fact remains here, this is just, you know, some of the small differences between the TV show and the comic books. But, you know, again, because of the fact that Magna doesn't really trust them too much, neither does Andrea. And Andrea doesn't trust them insofar as she thinks they're evil people. She doesn't trust them because she doesn't know anything about them. Now, what we also learn here is that in order for Carl to keep his mind entertained, in order to keep himself from going insane, he's also been working on wood carving. Now, we're also going to learn that this is done at the behest of Earl, the guy who's the blacksmith in the Hilltop Colony, because this is Carl's ambition, is to become a blacksmith. Now, the reason why this works so well and the reason why this is cool is because it would have been very easy for Kirkman to simply just say, well, I mean, Carl's the son of Rick, you know, and Rick is like the savior of modern society. He's a savior of the Hilltop and the Alexandria safe zone of the kingdom. He's the one that rallied them together and cast off the oppressive Nick. You know, he could have easily turned Carl into this very spoiled little kid who had a very haughty attitude, became very arrogant, and believed that because he was the son of the great Rick Grimes, that he's just entitled to live a life of luxury. But Carl doesn't take that approach. Again, this has all been built into his character development. Carl's very hands-on. When it comes down to it, Carl's a kid you want in your corner. You know, he's a guy that you want on your side fighting the fight because he's very, very capable. Plus, he's a kid, so nobody ever really takes him seriously. We learned that when Carl stowed away and ended up at Negan's base, and Negan began to speak with Carl directly. He realized that Carl's not someone to be trifled with, and when it comes down to it, Carl will put a hole in your head, you know, if it means you or him. But we also have this, again, Alexandria celebrating as best it can in the sense that they're making bread. You know, they're literally going through the early steps of society. I mean, they have working systems, not really mechanical in nature, or at least not super advanced in nature. You know, this is very indicative of like the Industrial Revolution, when the very early days of technology were beginning to emerge and people were moving away from horse and carriages to, you know, this interim period, which eventually led into the introduction of the Model T and automobiles. It doesn't mean they're going to start building cars, but it does mean that they have a very primitive form of industrialization within the Alexandria safe zone. And so in a lot of ways, Rick's journey to restore society back to its normal way is working out. And so from here, we actually pick up with a couple guys named Marco and Ken. Now, these guys are not going to be explicitly important to the story so much as what happens to them. It will be a major part of the introduction of the Whisperers. But with Marco and Ken, they've essentially just wandered too far past, because again, with Alexandria and with the kingdom and with the Hilltop Colony encompassing such a huge chunk of property, a lot of the exploration and a lot of the investigation is done very tentatively, in the sense that they don't just send writers out to the four winds and just say, come back when you come back and let us know what you found. I mean, they literally set up these organized grid searches and they go out and they explore territory in small chunks. It's more or less a grandiose instance of the 5-step plan that we'll see implemented later on when it comes to combat, which is actually a genius plan that was, I don't know if it was designed by Dante, but but it's certainly used by him, which again is of course a guy that we'll talk about later. But in the midst of them trying to get away, they're suddenly set upon by zombies, and one of them ends up falling on, I think it's Ken. But the result here is that while Marco is able to save him, it ends up meaning that Ken's leg is effectively broken. And so because of this, Marco basically has to carry him back home. He has to carry him back to the Hilltop Colony. Now, from here, we essentially pick up with the Hilltop Colony itself. And this is why The Walking Dead is so interesting, because one of the things that I hope you guys have noticed in the comic books and in the TV show is that Robert Kirkman never gives definitive dates. He never gives you an actual time of when things happen. He never tells us what day of the week it is. It could very well be that Rick Grimes and his team lost track of what day it is. And so what they consider to be Friday is actually Wednesday. But we never really see them talk about days anyway. We don't really know what year it is. We don't know how close it is to Christmas, with the exception of the fact that maybe it snows, and that's close enough. It gives us the most general idea. The only thing that we ever really have to give us any indication of how much time passes usually deals with the birth of children, specifically the birth of Maggie's child. Now, with Rick and Carl, reaching the Alexandria safe zone, once they get there, it's essentially Robert Kirkman saying, here's a general idea of how much time has passed. And what I mean by that is, as they're talking with Maggie, Rick asked the question, hey, how big is Herschel now? Because of course she named hers and Glenn's child after Herschel, which just makes sense. I mean, it's a very reasonable thing to do, and she says, well, he's 3 times as big as you saw him last time. And so we know that it's been at least 9 months because she's given birth to him. And if he's grown that fast, it's probably been, maybe a year and a half after his birth. And so if we were to say a year and a half, then it's been about 23 months, about 2 years roughly, since Negan was basically brought down. We can't take that as an absolute certainty, but Kirkman will also give us a little bit more information to go on here. The other half of this is that as much as Rick Grimes hates it, the people in the Hilltop Colony look at him as a savior. I mean, not really just like, hey, Rick, thanks for saving us, but in a lot of ways they worship him. I mean, it's hero worship. He shows up, people want to shake his hand, their kids, they want Rick to meet their kids. Oh, my child looks up to you. He's very much the guy that saved everyone. Now, the funny thing about this is Rick even goes as far as to comment and to say, hey, you act like, I'm the one that saved everything. If you hadn't taken over here at the Hilltop Colony, things probably wouldn't have gone the way they had. Now, this is also Kirkman telling us that in terms of these kingdoms, of course, we have Ezekiel running the kingdom itself, but we have Maggie running the Hilltop Colony, and she's essentially the equivalent of Rick within the Alexandria safe zone. And so we basically have 3 heads, this trifecta of the general area around where they're at, that they essentially control, or at least it's believed, they control everything around there. And so again, I know a lot of you guys are wondering, get to the Whispers, when do we get to the Whispers? We'll get there. Don't worry, we'll get there. But because of the fact that Carl is looking to be a blacksmith, I couldn't help but laugh at that a little bit. Because of the fact that Carl is looking to be a blacksmith, of course he goes and meets with Earl himself. The downside of this is that Earl says, hey, here's my new apprentice. Now, this is funny because Carl believed that he was going to be the only one. He was going to be the only one running the show. And so, I guess, working alongside Earl. And so at this point, it's a little bit of a struggle. The question is Carl really going to freak out? Is he going to lose it? Is he going to go off the rails? How's he going to cope with the fact that it seems as though he's lost his chance to be an apprentice to Earl, the one thing that he wanted most? But what we end up doing is we basically pick up with Marco. Now, Ken, of course, with his leg being broken, was effectively left behind by Marco, but Marco's first speeches after coming to terrify the hell out of everybody. And the reason why is he says, hey, we have to go find Ken. We got to go grab him. I left him there. I didn't have a choice. He says, but the zombies were whispering, like they were talking. He says they were speaking. It was the dead. The dead were talking. Now, when I initially read this, I was like, there's no way that the zombies are whispering. But even if they are, if the zombies are talking, then that ushers in a whole new thing, because even if the whispers of the zombies are just on a marginal scale, it means that they're thinking now. It means that they have functionality, they have brain power. They shouldn't, but for whatever reason they are. They're operating on a very baseline, thinking pattern. And so because of this, when these warnings from Marco come, people don't really know what to take it. In their initial minds, he's losing his mind. They're just like, okay, Marco's been out there too long. Whether it's dehydration, whether it's, near starvation, for whatever reason, his perspective of the world is warped. Most likely what had happened is that he had basically been stuck out there too long, and he was hearing voices in his head. And as he was killing zombies, for whatever reason, he connected the dots and said, well, I'm hearing voices, clearly I'm sane. It must mean the zombies are talking. And so he's effectively an insane person, overcome by the impossibility of his situation. Now, what we also learn here in the Hilltop Colony is that Sophia has become pretty much of a badass. Now, again, since I know a lot of people are probably going to be jumping on with regards to the Whisperer's concept, it's one one of the reasons why I'm going through and explaining a lot of the things that we may have talked about before or that people are already aware of. But in the TV show, we of course know that Sophia died. She died at the end of season 2, I think it was, on Herschel's farm. She was turned into a zombie. In the comics, that was never the case. Her mother, Donna, died. She ended up, being killed, but at least I think it was Donna. Was it Donna or was it, I don't remember who the mother of Sophia was. I know Donna was the mother of the twins, I think. God, my memory of The Walking Dead. I need to go back and reread those comics, but if you guys remember who Sophia's mom was, post it down there. But the idea is that Maggie had effectively taken up, the adoption of Sophia, so to speak, in the sense that Sophia had just kind of latched on to Maggie, and Maggie was thrown into that situation. So in a lot of ways, she was Sophia's adopted mother. But, as Sophia made her way throughout, the whole zombie apocalypse, she was always in the background. She was never in the foreground. She was never nearly as active as Carl was, but there was always this sort of chemistry between the two of them, with Robert Kirkman saying, hey, once these two get older, they'll probably end up developing feelings for one another. Once they get to that age where, romantic attraction will become a major part of their lives, they'll probably end up getting together. And it made sense. With regard to the Walking Dead stories, it always makes sense that Kirkman essentially just starts pairing people off. He says people will end up falling in love with each other, they will end up forming their own relationships, and their lives will begin together. It's a great way to keep the positivity of the story going, because in truth, if this was like a Hamlet where people were just dying all the time, it would be one of the most depressing stories ever to read, and I would be like, well, I'm not doing The Walking Dead. This story's depressing as hell. But the idea here is that within the Hilltop Colony itself, it's another instance of people celebrating life as best they can. Because again, we see that in Alexandria with people who are growing their own crops, and it gives them a feeling of contribution. Now, this is one of the reasons why Robert Kirkman's writing of The Walking Dead and the character development works so well, because what he's essentially saying here is that, in modern day, people don't really see the fruits of their labor. A person designs a shirt on one side of the world, and they never get to see the satisfaction on the face of a person who wears it. Somebody builds a Blu-ray player on one side of the world, and they never get to see anybody use it on the other. With regards to what's going on right now in The Walking Dead, in these communities, they get to see the fruits of their labor. The people who are here within the Hilltop Colony, within the Alexandria safe zone, they're protected. Why are they protected? Why are they comfortable? Because a man somewhere along the line, or a woman somewhere along the line, is protecting them. And even if they're out doing guard duty while everybody's in here eating, there's a measure of pride that goes along with that. There's a measure of pride with saying, all these people here are comfortable. They're not anxious, they're not nervous, they're not on edge, they're comfortable, and their guard is down, and I'm the reason that's possible. There's a lot of pride that goes along with that. People say, these desks, these houses, people live in these because I made those. It's a really great quote from World War Z when Max Brooks wrote it, when they were talking about, the restoration efforts and people creating things. One of the guys was saying, well, like the person who's wearing those shoes, I made those. The person that's wearing that shirt, I made that. It's a pride kind of thing that goes along with it. And because people have so much pride in what it is they do, they have more of a sense of community. And I'll be honest with you guys, this looks amazing right now. Like these great big huge communal dinners, it looks like the most fun you could ever have. Just like hanging out and talking, getting drunk a little bit, and eating some amazing food. It creates a very cohesive and a very enjoyable environment. Not only that, we also have Earl telling Carl, hey, look, man, no one said I could only have one apprentice. Like we have 2 apprentices now. I mean, you can be my second apprentice. That's not a problem. And so it's really Kirkman saying, hey guys, like everything's great now. All is right with the world. The Alexandria safe zone is coming along fine. Those people who were part of the Saviors that defected and ended up joining Rick's group or ended up traveling to the Hilltop Colony, their lives are so much better. Everybody's more comfortable. The people in the Hilltop Colony, they have these huge communal dinners, they're growing crops, everything's flourishing in the kingdom. Michonne's with Ezekiel, everything is going fine. Everything's progressing and everybody's having a really good time, and it all really works out. The problem with this, Rob Core, is that not everything is fine. Not everything is okay. Because Rick and his team have no clue what's going on out there. God, I love this story. So what we do is we effectively pick up with Dante. Now, of course, Dante is leading a group of guys to go find Ken. When Marco said, hey, I had to leave Ken out there, and we brought him back, or at least I came back, Maggie was like, okay, Dante, you're one of the best of our guys who, does patrolling, one of the best of our guys who's the most capable in fighting. You take 2 guys, go find Ken and bring him back. And so what Marco says is, hey, it was off to the west and there was a barn somewhere. Now, they're effectively out in the middle of, rural America. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say say they're in the heartland of America, but they're up in that Virginia area where it's just like miles and miles and miles of fields. And so because of this, you know, when they say it's to the west and there's a barn, there's a lot of land out there. And so it's not too confusing. It's really just go west. When you come across a barn, look inside and see what's going on. Now, once they actually get inside this barn, they actually realize there's a mountain of zombies there. Like there's a whole horde of zombies inside that place. Not only that, while that's happening, once Andrea, you know, gets back into her home after speaking with Eugene, she's set upon by Magna and the rest of her people because they want their questions answered. Now, in my mind, if someone comes into your home, you invite somebody in and then they take you prisoner because they have questions that need to be answered, well, that's immediate grounds for execution. Like if I were Andrea, I'd be like, well, you guys are all gonna die now, you know, so like, I mean, Andrea could easily take all these folks on by herself, you know, and I would have killed them all, to be quite honest, you know. But here's the other thing too. Here's why I say that the whole time frame thing, it kind of works out because, you know, to sidetrack from this introduction of the Whispers, and I know you guys are pulling your hair out of your head right now, but the idea of a time frame is given to us when we have Brianna and Rick and Maggie talking with one another with Herschel there. Maggie, you know, says, hey, can you say sunset? And he just says, you know, sunset. He doesn't say a complete word, but kids usually start saying, you know, a reasonable number of words around 18 months or so. And so what this means is that it's about 18 months. You know, it's around 2 years between the time that Negan was defeated and the modern day. I just wanted to go ahead and throw that out there because I thought it was kind of cool. Anyway, back to the Whispers, because we don't find out what Magna's conversation is with Andrea until the next story arc. But back with the Whispers, so we have Dante holding out with these other two guys. And this is why I say the formation they have, the pattern they have, the 5-step program works, because what they do is they call out, they huddle together into a formation, you know, and then they take a step and they kill a zombie and they'll say 1 step, and they take a second step and they'll kill a zombie and they'll say 2 steps, and they keep doing that until they get to 5 steps. When they get to 5 steps, it's get back into position, let the next wave come, and then kill them. It's a brilliant strategy. Like, it's a genius strategy for killing zombies because you're never so far away from somebody that they can't come to help you if you're overwhelmed by the amount of zombies that are there, but you're also close enough that you can all fight off a reasonable amount of zombies with some measure of confidence. The problem with this, God, I love this story. The problem with this is that as they're fighting these zombies, they hear whispers, people saying they're good, like they're very good. Now, Dante's the only one that hears it. The other guys don't. Now, I would go as far as to say this is because of the fact that Dante's very capable and he's always really, really aware of his situation. And so because of this, you know, he's quite capable in paying attention to everything that's going on, where the other guys may be overwhelmed by the situation. But once one of the guys goes to kill one of the zombies, they lift a knife and they block the attack, after which they kill that guy. And so because of this, they're like, the zombies have knives. Like, these zombies are thinking these zombies have knives. And the initial response is, we got to get the hell out of here if these zombies have knives, because we've seen them use tools before, but never, you know, with any measure of understanding of what they do. We've never seen zombies stab people before. And so with Dante seeming to be the only guy left here, you know, of course, Dante attacks him and says, I heard you, I know you can talk. And they said, yes, we can kill too. Now, Dante cuts off her head. You know, he cuts off this zombie's head. And in response to doing so, he also comes across another one of these people that has a knife, you know, and says, hey, we whisper, the dead don't mind. You'll understand what we're talking about. Now, of course, Dante kills this guy as well. But when he does that, he also comes to the realization they were talking, like they were reasonable talking people. And so what he does is he bends down and he finds out that this zombie face is actually a mask. And when he takes it off, he finds a person under it. That a person is dressed up as a zombie. Now, this is the very essence of what a whisperer is. A whisperer is literally a person that dresses up as a zombie and walks around among the zombies and literally just uses the zombies as a moving army. What a genius thing to do. Like, what a genius idea to do. Now, once Dante comes to this realization, his idea is to essentially take this back to the Hilltop Colony and show them what's going on. The problem is that he's told not to move. And when he turns around, someone has a double-barreled shotgun to the back of his head. But with that being said, we're gonna bring this video to an end. God, I love the Whisper Wars. The Whispers are amazing. The Whisper War is actually really badass too. But the Whispers are amazing because, like I said, you can't kill an enemy you can't see. And if you can't differentiate between zombies and whisperers, how do you know which one is which? How do you know which one is trying to kill you and which one will just harmlessly move right past you? So it's that's why I say they're worse than Negan, because you don't know they're there. But anyway, guys, if you're new here to Comics Explained, be sure to hit the subscribe button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.